Okay, welcome back to another lecture in your Armology course, your favorite course that you're taking, and educating yourself in the pursuit of the holy games, the holy arm games, brothers and sisters. Today, I'm going to be talking about exercise selection, probably my most controversial stance, okay? And as a disclaimer, I'm basing all of these takes on primarily my personal experimentation over a decade, growing my arms up to now 18 inches. Recently hit my goal of getting them to 18 inches, okay? Although I am privy to a lot of the science and studies surrounding many of these topics, I tend to lean on my own personal experimentation, my guinea pig technique, applying any and every different type of training modality that I can get my hands on onto myself, and then assessing the results over time while adjusting and tweaking all of the different parameters, being rep ranges, rest days, training intensity, sets, volume, and always assessing how my body seems to respond to it. And then over many years, drawing insights and conclusions from all of that experience, and now sharing them to you in this Armology lecture on exercise selection. So that's the disclaimer and basis where a lot of this comes from. And you can either ride with it or you can not. It's up to you. So exercise selection, generally speaking, massively overstated, meaning the majority of the fitness content online or in person, personal trainers, exercise scientists, primarily though fitness content put out online, I would say is probably the worst culprit, associating the majority of the value of a muscle building workout to the exercises done. Meaning, how do I get a big chest? It's this exercise, this exercise, this exercise. Okay, you'll see videos and different things. Well, they'll outline the different muscles that you need to hit. For example, the biceps. Bicep has a short head and a long head. So to grow the biceps, what you need to do if you want to build muscle in your biceps is to hit the short head with this movement, hit the long head with that movement, hit this part with that, and boom, boom, boom. You're doing 17 different fucking bicep exercises to hit it from all the different angles, because that's what you need to do to grow your muscles, to grow your biceps, whatever muscle you're training. Having bought into this, applied it to myself, experimented with it, and cross-referenced that with other approaches where exercise selection is completely diluted to the point where you're maybe only doing one exercise for a muscle, which I have done, I would conclude that the exercise selection plays the most tiniest, minuscule role in your muscle building journey. And in this case, we're talking about arms, so we'll keep it specific to arms. I would say it's even more emphasized for arms because the muscles are pretty simple, in that your bicep primarily is just going to flex your elbow. Okay, it has some other functions. I know, I understand, I know what they are. But primarily, if you want to grow this muscle, you're focusing on bending your elbow like this, flexing your elbow. If you want to grow your tricep, primarily, you're focusing on extending your elbow. Okay? Now, there's some attachments and some anatomy, which I'm not going to go into, where the position that you have your elbow in, meaning if you have your elbow behind your body, for example, and you're doing curls or you're doing tricep extensions, that's going to be a little bit different. The tension on the muscle, or if you have your elbows like up like this and you're doing skull crushers or you're doing cable curls, it's going to change the range of, or the length of the muscle as it works through the given range of motion. But again, massively overstated, okay? I've spent so much time putting my biceps into the most contracted position, the most lengthened position, same thing with the triceps. It is not what you should focus on. It is not what is going to drive growth for you, which is the main goal, okay? And I think part of the reason that this has happened is because it's really easy to make content. If you say, the best way to, even for me, okay, I grew my triceps. People come, hey, what exercise did you do? For the past 3 years, all I've done is dumbbell overhead tricep extensions due to limitations, due to injury, okay? I would do some variety if I could, but that's literally the only exercise I did. And I've seen significant growth in my triceps doing that movement, focusing on other parameters, such as what rep range, what intensity, how often do I hit the muscle, how long do I rest in between sets, how many sets do I do total? Those parameters, which are not as sexy and not as easy to make visually appealing, eye-popping content about, are way more important drivers of your muscle growth in your arms, okay? Based on my personal experience. And so, back to kind of why it's become popularized, because I think it's an easy answer for content creators, fitness professionals to provide. And it's easy to make content. I could make a really interesting video about the anatomy of the bicep and how you do this exercise at the short head, that exercise, and it's visual and people see it and they go, oh, okay, yeah, makes sense. And they go in there and they're hitting it from all these different angles. People make videos like that, but they don't even touch on the other parameters that are more important. I give you the best bicep workout and it's 5 different exercises with different angles and shit, but I don't even tell you the rep range. I don't tell you the intensity. I don't tell you the rest time. I don't tell you the amount of sets. I don't tell you how often to hit the muscle. It's garbage. It's not going to serve you at all. Okay. I get a little bit spirited about it because I just seen that over and over and over again, and having lived and bought into it and then all these years, it's become very clear to me that that's not the main thing that's going to drive your growth. It's a very small piece of the pie. And if you want to learn about the anatomy in your arms and train your arms with different exercises, okay, but generally speaking, not needed and vastly overstated for reasons that I've touched on. So what I think is better is to zero in on a couple exercises, a couple movements that you like. And the reason being is that it's easier to track your progress and progress your training over time if you're just doing a smaller number of exercises. For example, if you were doing like 5 different movements for your biceps, 5 different for your triceps, and you're changing the order each workout, and you're adding new ones in all the time, and you're trying to track the weight that you're doing and the reps from session to session, it becomes really difficult, right? Whereas if there's some consistency, and I'm just doing 1 or 2 movements for biceps and 1 or 2 movements for triceps each workout, and I do them in the same order, at least let's say for 2 months, it's easier for me to manipulate the other variables, being how much weight am I using, what rep range am I using, how many sets do I do, what intensity, what are the rest times in between sets, and then how often do I do the workouts. I can change all of those factors while keeping the exercise selection fairly consistent, and these are the things that are going to drive my growth. And it's hard for me to assess and track, am I getting stronger, am I adding reps, when the exercises keep mixing and matching and moving around and being placed in different orders. And it's also harder for me to assess, when I increase the intensity, did my body respond to that, or is it because I added new exercises? What happens when I up the volume? Did my body respond to that, or is it because I changed the order of the exercises again? So you can kind of start to see how it muddles your ability to experiment with these other parameters and progressively make them more and more difficult, meaning up the intensity, up the volume, up the sets potentially, or that's volume, but find ways to structure your workout to make it more and more difficult, train more often. You lose efficacy in that. It becomes less effective if you're constantly trying to do all these different movements all the time. So I think you're better off to simplify and just pick a few that you like. At the end of the day, you're flexing your elbow and you're extending your elbow. It's not that complicated. You're going to hit both heads of the bicep with every bicep curling movement. You're going to hit all 3 heads of the tricep with every tricep extension movement, okay? You don't need to focus on it any more than that. If you want, you can do a couple different movements just to cover your bases. But I would say focus on a couple that you like and keep them consistent. And then if you start to get bored, after 2 to 3 months, you can change to some new exercise because you've been able to track your training and progress the other variables, up the volume, up the reps, up the weight, over a couple months period. Then you could go, okay, now I'm just going to switch to some different movements because I'm bored. That's fine. But if you're constantly mixing and matching, it gets in the way of progressing the other things that are actually going to drive the growth. And the underlying kind of caveat to all of this is that I'm encouraging you to experiment with those different things to find what's going to work best for you. And as a general kind of thing, there's a few areas or structures that I found to be effective, one of them being longer rest times, training to maximum intensity, maybe even beyond failure, using advanced lifting techniques like drop sets and things like that to push a set all the way to failure and then lower the rep and do more, lower the weight and then immediately do more reps and then lower the weight some more and immediately do some more reps after that. I would say that's a beyond failure type of training where you're pushing that intensity even further. Using different tempos, using a fast tempo and a slow tempo, having some variation in your tempo throughout the workout. Some of the sets you do slower and controlled with a lighter weight. Some of them you do more fast and explosive with a heavier weight. Having pretty substantial volume, meaning you should do at least 5, potentially up to 10, 15 working sets for each muscle in each workout. And then frequency, I hit my arms every other day now, but you have to build up to that over time. So in the beginning, just hit them once a week, and then twice a week, and then potentially up to 3 times a week. So those are some kind of rough gauges of what I've found to be effective. But in all of that, I'm not giving you the specific blueprint because you should look at your training and go, okay, how can I make it more difficult? For the past 2 months, I've been consistently just hitting the arms once a week. I could probably up the frequency and start hitting them twice a week. All right, a few months down the line, okay, now I'm doing that. Okay, I take each set like close to failure, but I save 1 or 2 in the tank. Maybe it's game time, and now I need to take at least, let's say, half my sets to absolute failure, and the other half are going to be to 90% or whatever, close to. Okay, some more time passes, you look at your training again, you go, I always do 5 sets for triceps and then 5 for biceps. Let's bump that up to 7. Okay, so you're scaling these other parameters with the theme of looking at your training and going, how can I make it more difficult? I think that will not lead you astray if you are thinking, how can I try to find a way to make it more difficult? And built into all of this is that I'm encouraging you to find that answer for yourself and to take some ownership over your training, because ultimately, if you actually want to get substantial gains, you can't just keep asking other people to tell you exactly what to do. Okay? You take little bits and pieces from everyone, but take ownership and go, this is my program. This is what I'm doing. This is the structure. All right? I'm going to do that. I'm going to be consistent. I'm going to keep hitting it. Now, a couple months have gone by. How can I make this structure more difficult? Don't worry about changing the exercises. The other factors that I'm mentioning, the intensity, change the rep range, change the rest time, add more sets, train more often, whatever, right? Scaling those things to make them progressively more difficult. And it's not rocket science. So if you're like, oh, what should I do? Just look at what you're doing and then go, how could I just make it a little harder? And it'll make sense. I'm going to train to failure on some of my sets. I'm going to hit the arms twice a week instead of once a week. Simple things like that. Continuously doing them over time and seeing how your body responds when you change and make things harder is going to be the most effective way to go about it, in my opinion, based on my experience. And that's why exercise selection, I think, is massively overstated. And you should just focus on a handful of movements, and the way that you do them and the way that you structure your workout is much more important in terms of predicting muscle growth and setting up your workouts in a way that stimulate muscle growth. Okay, so I hope all that makes sense. I hope you learned a thing or two in this lecture on Armology and how to grow up pipe daddies and what my thoughts are on exercise selection. Go out and apply that. Be consistent. Be an animal with your training. Let's go.